A key part of the outcome of the Great Depression was the rise of the middle class's wealth. This figure shows that while the share of the wealth of the bottom 90% of families did gradually increase from 15% to a peak of 36% from the 1920s to the mid-1980s, right here, to the mid-1980s, it did increase. It then dramatically declined, and by 2012, the bottom 90% of Americans owned only 23% of the total U.S. wealth, which is really scary because it shows how close we are to another Great Depression or maybe even something worse. Okay, in this graph, we can see the combined trends of both the bottom 90% and the top 0.1%. At the top, in the yellow, you can see the gradual rise in wealth of the middle class and then the sudden decline in the late 1980s, lasting until 2012. And according to recent research, this trend has continued its decline. You can also see that the wealth of the bottom 90% has declined and the wealth of the top 0.1% has increased since 1977 or so. In fact, they've increased so much that by 2012, the top 0.1% owned almost equal amounts of wealth in the United States as the whole bottom 90% of Americans, which is absolutely absurd to me, because that means around 288 million people, which is the bottom 90%, own the same amount of money as around 320,000 people. Now, wealth inequality does not only separate the rich and the poor, it also separates races financially. The wealth inequality in America affects different households, some more negatively than others, depending upon the race of the household. The Great Recession has deepened the long-standing racial and ethnic wealth divide in the United States. According to a new Pew Research Center analysis of a Federal Reserve survey, we can see on this graph how a gap in wealth exists for both African Americans and Hispanic Americans when compared to white Americans. On the left, we can see the distribution of wealth among African American households versus white American households. The typical white family nowadays earns 13 times as much as the typical African American family. This statistic has doubled since the turn of the century, when it was around 6 times. The white population earned around 6 times as much as the African American population. Now, African Americans are obviously not the only race that are suffering from this wealth inequality. The gap is the same for Hispanic populations from the turn of the century to now, around 10 times as much, but the gap is still very large. Here's another graph. It shows us the net worth of households in 2007, 2010, and 2013 among white, black, and Hispanic Americans. First, I want to point out how white Americans were the only families to see an increase in wealth from 2010 to 2013. During the same time, African Americans saw their wealth decrease by $5,600, and the Hispanic family saw a decrease in wealth by $2,300 annually. This is important because it shows that there's definitely a significant difference in households across the United States, depending upon ethnicity. After seeing this in graphs and figures, I think we can agree that the racial wealth disparity in America is an issue that must soon be dealt with.